somewhere in occupied Germany. The summer of 1945. A German general sits across a wooden table from an American officer who has just captured him. The German has lost his army. He has lost his country. He has lost the war. The American asks him one question. What beat you? The German does not say the Sherman tank. He does not say the B-17 bomber. He does not say the atom bomb, which had been dropped only a few weeks before on the other side of the world. He points out the window, at the small, ugly four-wheel drive truck the American drove up in, canvas seats, folding windshield. A vehicle that cost $738 to build. That, the German says, that is what beat us. This kind of conversation took place, in one form or another, hundreds of times across occupied Germany in the summer and autumn of 1945. American officers sat down with captured Wehrmacht generals and asked them, in plain language, what had gone wrong, and a strange pattern emerged in their answers. They did not name the weapons that had killed their soldiers. They named the vehicle that had carried the American soldiers to the fight. They named the Jeep. To understand why, we have to go back to a small workshop in the United States in the late autumn of 1943, where American engineers had opened a wooden crate and pulled out a small German staff car painted the color of Egyptian dust. 4 wheels, air-cooled engine in the rear, sloping front, designed by the office of Ferdinand Porsche himself. It was a Volkswagen Type 82, a Kübelwagen. The staff car the Wehrmacht drove across the deserts of North Africa and the steppes of Russia. The engineers ran it through sand pits. They timed it on slopes. They compared it, part by part, against the American vehicle their own soldiers were now calling by one syllable. Jeep. The final verdict would be written down on the 15th of March, 1945, a restricted document. Fewer than 1,000 copies would ever circulate. It was called Technical Manual E30-451, the handbook on German military forces. The sentence, when it appeared, was direct, cold, almost cruel. The Volkswagen, the German equivalent of the American Jeep, is inferior in every way, except in the comfort of its seating accommodations. But that manual could not capture the strangest thing, the thing the Americans noticed during testing, the thing the Germans had been doing in the field for almost 2 years. When German soldiers captured American Jeeps, they did not destroy them. They did not abandon them. They fought to keep them. To understand how this small truck, designed in a long weekend by a freelance engineer in a half-empty Pennsylvania drafting room, became by Dwight Eisenhower's own post-war account one of the 4 pieces of equipment most vital to Allied victory, we have to go back further still. Back to a problem the United States Army had been quietly losing for almost 100 years. We have to go back to the mud. August 1939. Plattsburgh, New York. 52,000 American troops move across the countryside in what contemporary newspapers describe as the largest peacetime military exercise in American history. There are mock artillery barrages. There are simulated attacks. And along every dirt road in the exercise area there are columns. Columns of horses. Columns of Model T Fords. And nothing works. The horses are too slow. They eat too much. They drop dead in the summer heat. The motorcycles fall over in mud. They break the legs of the men who ride them. They cannot climb a moderate hill with 2 soldiers aboard. The Model T Ford, the vehicle the Army has used as a staff car since the First World War, is a road vehicle. Take it off the road into a ploughed field, and it becomes a tractor without traction. An officer watches this failure unfold. He is 58 years old. His hair is thinning. His uniform is precise. His name is George Catlett Marshall. Marshall is a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute. He served in the muddy fields of France in 1918. He remembers what mud did to men, to messages, to orders that arrived too late because the man carrying them had drowned in wet clay a mile from where he was needed. For years, Marshall has been asking Congress for a small, fast, 4-wheel drive scout vehicle. Something that can go where horses cannot. Something that can climb where motorcycles will not. For years, Congress has ignored him. The peacetime army does not need such things. There is no war. There will be no war. On the 1st of September 1939, as the Plattsburgh maneuvers wind down, George Marshall takes the oath of office as the new Chief of Staff of the United States Army. The same morning, on the other side of the world, Germany invades Poland. France will burn next. Marshall knows it. He knows it in the way a man knows something inside his chest, before his mind is ready to say it out loud. Whatever he is going to do about the Army's mobility problem, He is going to have to do it in a hurry. The 11th of July, 1940, 2 weeks after France has surrendered, the United States Army Quartermaster Corps mails a document to 135 American automobile manufacturers. The specifications inside are severe to the point of cruelty. The Army wants a four-wheel drive vehicle. Empty weight, no more than 1,300 pounds. Payload, 660. Wheelbase, 75 inches. Engine producing at least 85 foot-pounds of torque. A fold-down windshield. A speed range from 3 to 50 miles per hour. And a rear bench that can carry 3 soldiers and a machine gun. Bids due in 11 days. A working prototype due in 49. 135 envelopes are opened across America. Engineers read the terms. Executives shake their heads. Almost every one of them throws the document in the trash. The deadline is a joke. The weight limit is impossible. No serious company can respond. Of 135 companies, only 2 do. One is Willys Overland Motors of Toledo, Ohio, a solid established manufacturer. The other is a small, nearly bankrupt company in Butler, Pennsylvania. A company that has been building tiny European-style economy cars that nobody wants to buy. A company that is so close to financial collapse it has already laid off its engineering staff. The American Bantam Car Company. Bantam has no money, it has no engineers, it has 11 days to submit a complete bid with blueprints, cost calculations and supplier lists. And then 49 days from acceptance to deliver a finished, drivable, fully tested vehicle. Ford will join the competition shortly afterward when the Army invites them in. But that is later. For now, Bantam is on its own, and Bantam has one phone number. His name is Carl Knight Probst. He is 56 years old, the son of a country doctor from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. He has been building automobiles in one form or another since the earliest years of the century. Right now, in the summer of 1940, he is between jobs. He is short on cash. He is not looking for work. The president of Bantam calls him. Probst says no. Bantam pleads. Probst still says no. Then a man named William Knudsen picks up the telephone. Knudsen has recently been recruited from the presidency of General Motors to take charge of all army procurement in the United States. He does not call to negotiate. He calls to tell Karl Probst that the country needs him. Probst hangs up the phone. He looks at the clock. He gets into his car. He drives east on the 17th of July, 1940. By the time he walks into Bantam's nearly empty drafting room and rolls up his sleeves, he has less than a week to design a vehicle from scratch. A vehicle that has never existed before. A vehicle that 133 other companies have decided cannot be built. He works through Wednesday night. He works through all of Thursday. By Friday afternoon, the 19th of July, he has completed the basic layout drawings for what will, within a year, be called the Jeep. Friday evening, Karl Probst puts down his pencil. He walks out of the drafting room. He goes to the movies. On Saturday and Sunday, he finalizes the cost calculations and the supplier specifications. On Monday morning, the 22nd of July, he and the Bantam plant manager pile the documents into a car and drive them to the Quartermaster Corps Test Center at Camp Holabird, on the southeast edge of Baltimore. He has laid out the basic design in 2 days. He has finished the bid package in 5. The vehicle in those drawings is not original in any individual component. The engine is a small 4-cylinder from a company called Continental. The transfer case comes from Spicer. The transmission comes from Warner Gear. The axles are modified Studebaker Champion units. What is original is the way Karl Probst has stitched these ordinary civilian parts together into something the Army has been asking for and not getting for 30 years. A small 4-wheel drive, all-purpose vehicle that can be built fast, repaired anywhere, and shipped anywhere on Earth. The 23rd of September 1940, 50 days after the contract is signed. The finished prototype, called the Bantam Reconnaissance Car, is driven from Butler, Pennsylvania to Camp Holabird, Maryland, under its own power, because Bantam cannot afford to ship it. Roughly 250 miles by the roads of the day. The prototype pulls into the Camp Holabird gate, 30 minutes before the deadline. And now something happens that will change nothing about American history and everything about the life of Karl Probst. The Army takes Bantam's design. They run it through brutal testing. They declare it the best candidate. They shake the hands of Bantam's executives. And then they hand Bantam's blueprints to Willys Overland and to Ford. The Army argues, by the terms of the contract, that the drawings now belong to the government. that Bantam is too small to build the numbers the army will need, that the design must go to companies with real factories. Karl Probst is furious. He has no lawyer, he has no leverage, he has no way to fight the United States Army. He watches his design walk out the door. Willys will improve it. Ford will improve it further. In 1948, the Federal Trade Commission will finally rule that the original design honors belonged to neither of them. They belonged to American Bantam. By then, Karl Probst will be an old man. The improvements come quickly. At Willys, the vice president of engineering is a man named Delmar G. Roos. Everyone calls him Barney. He was previously chief engineer at Studebaker. He has spent the last 2 years modernizing an old Whippet 4-cylinder into a 60-horsepower motor. Willys calls it the Go Devil. Barney Roos has run that engine flat out on a dynamometer for 100 hours without braking. The engine he started with had failed at 22. The Go Devil is, simply, the best small military engine in the world. The Army insists that Willys use it, and that Ford use it too. Ford, in turn, contributes something else. A stamped steel grille, with vertical slats, that will become the visual signature of the Jeep forever. By July of 1941, everything is standardized. Willys builds the vehicle as the Model MB. Ford builds the same vehicle with parts interchangeable down to the last bolt as the GPW. The W stands for Willys, because Ford is producing a licensed Willys design. Bantam has invented the machine, Willys has perfected its engine, Ford has given it its face, and Karl Probst, who drew the whole thing in 5 days, will not become rich, will not become famous, will die of cancer in Dayton, Ohio, at the age of 79, nearly forgotten. But the strange little vehicle he had drawn, the vehicle that 133 companies had said could not be built, is about to do something none of them could have imagined. It is about to cross an ocean, and it is about to enter a desert. Summer 1942, eastern Egypt. The heat comes up off the sand in waves you can see with your eyes. The horizon shimmers. The air burns the inside of your nose. This is not a place where machines are supposed to survive, and it is not a place where men are supposed to fight. But they are fighting here, and a new kind of vehicle has just arrived. In a canvas tent at a forward hideout at Bir el Qusair, on the northern edge of the Qattara Depression, a young officer walks around the small trucks that have just been delivered to his unit. He is tall, he is thin. He has recently recovered from injuries he sustained in an experimental parachute jump that nearly killed him. His name is David Stirling. He is 26 years old. Before the war, Stirling attended Trinity College, Cambridge. He was sent down, expelled. An accumulation of student transgressions, they called it. He was a Scots Guards officer, and he had convinced his superiors in Cairo, against significant resistance, that small teams of trained men, striking German airfields by surprise, could destroy more enemy aircraft on the ground than the entire Royal Air Force could destroy in the air. His unit is called the Special Air Service, the SAS. For months, the SAS has depended on another unit to carry them to their targets. The Long-Range Desert Group, heavy Chevrolet trucks. The SAS troopers, with the black British sense of humour that keeps men alive in impossible places, call them the Libyan Desert Taxi Service. But now David Stirling is standing in front of his own vehicles, his own trucks, American Jeeps, the very first ones to reach his unit. He looks at them for a long time, and he understands immediately what they are. They are not transport, they are a weapon system. He gives the order, take them apart. The men strip the Jeeps down. They cut off the windshields, they remove the bumpers. Anything that is not needed for combat, they throw into the sand. Then they bolt Vickers K aircraft machine guns to the front and rear of each vehicle, 4 guns per Jeep, fed by Pan magazines of 60 or 96 rounds, firing somewhere between 950 and 1,200 rounds per minute. They fill the back of each Jeep with jerrycans of fuel, jerrycans of water, ammunition, small bombs, explosive charges that another officer named Jock Luz has perfected for igniting parked aircraft in a single flash. They finish the modifications at dusk. The night of the 26th of July, 1942, 18 modified Jeeps, 72 machine guns, and a target roughly 50 miles across the open desert, a German airfield called Sidi Hanesh. Sidi Hanesh is where the Luftwaffe stages the bombers and transport aircraft that supply Rommel's Afrika Korps. The Junkers 52 transports parked there carry the fuel and the ammunition, without which Rommel's panzers cannot move, without which they cannot fight, without which they will, sooner or later, roll to a stop in the desert like beetles on their backs, Destroy the transports on the ground, and you starve the panzers. The 18 jeeps drive out of the hideout with their headlights off. 2 columns, a V formation, 50 miles of open desert under a black sky. Their navigator is a man named Mike Sadler from the Long Range Desert Group. He steers the entire formation by the stars. They roll onto the airfield in silence. Parked aircraft on either side, ground crew asleep. The Luftwaffe security men have not seen the intruders. Not yet. David Stirling fires a green flare into the sky. All 18 jeeps open fire at once, 72 machine guns. Tracer rounds arcing in every direction. Parked aircraft catching fire one after another after another. The V formation drives the full length of the airfield in the middle of the chaos, raking every plane on either side. In about 15 minutes, they destroy or damage roughly 37 Axis aircraft, including the Junkers 52 transports. The jeeps roll off the airfield. Behind them, they leave the Luftwaffe on fire. They lose one man killed on the airfield itself. His name is Lance Bombardier John Robson. He is 21 years old. The next morning, as the surviving jeeps withdraw across the open desert, German Stuka dive bombers catch the French task detachment in the sunlight and kill the French paratrooper André Zernheld. The remaining jeeps split into small groups. They reach their hideout days later, exhausted, sunburned, alive. In the 15 months between the night David Stirling first bolted a Vickers gun onto a jeep, and the day he was captured by the Germans in Tunisia in January 1943, the SAS destroyed more than 250 Axis aircraft on the ground in North Africa, more than the Royal Air Force destroyed in the same theatre over the same period. 250 transports and fighters and bombers that never flew again. 250 times Rommel's panzers ran a little shorter on fuel, a little shorter on ammunition, a little closer to standing still in the desert. Stirling himself was captured while sleeping in a Tunisian wadi. He never saw the airfield attacks that followed his capture. The German press, and the British press too, took to calling him the Phantom Major. Recent scholarship by the historian Gavin Mortimer suggests the nickname was coined by British war correspondents, not personally awarded by Rommel, as legend has it. But it did not matter what he was called. What mattered was that he had opened a door, and every army in the world would eventually walk through it. Stirling was passed up the German prisoner of war chain. He escaped several times. He was recaptured every time. In August of 1944, the Germans finally sent him to Colditz Castle, where they kept prisoners who kept trying to leave. He was still there when the war ended. But while Stirling was rotting behind stone walls, something was happening in the wider war that even he could not have foreseen. The German army had a problem, not a small problem, a structural problem, the kind of problem an entire nation cannot fix once it has begun. The German army entered the war in September 1939 with roughly 514,000 horses on its rolls. Horses. Not tanks, not trucks, horses. By the opening of the Soviet campaign in June 1941, that number had grown to about 750,000. By February of 1945, with German factories dying under Allied bombing, the Wehrmacht was using roughly 1,200,000 horses, more than twice what it had used to invade Poland. Across the entire war, the German army employed something like 2,750,000 horses, more than it had used in the First World War. The image most Americans carry of the German army is the image of the Panzer Division, crashing across a border in a thunder of mechanized fury, steel and smoke and radios and speed. That image was true, but it was only true at the front edge. Behind that edge, the bulk of the German army marched the way armies had marched since Julius Caesar, on its own feet, with a horse pulling the wagon, with a man leading the horse. The American army of 1944 did not have that problem. The American army of 1944 had jeeps. An American infantry regiment by the end of the war was issued about 145 of them. A glider infantry regiment had 24. A parachute infantry regiment had 17. There was no British equivalent, no French equivalent, no German equivalent in the entire war. Now compare the two little vehicles, the German Kübelwagen, beautiful, comfortable, designed by the Porsche office in Stuttgart. Air-cooled engine producing about 24 to 25 horsepower, two-wheel drive, the American Jeep, ugly, square, loud, four-wheel drive that could be engaged in high range while the vehicle was still moving. A Go Devil engine producing 60 horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute. capable of fording 18 inches of water without preparation, substantially more with a special kit the Army developed for beach landings, capable of towing a trailer carrying nearly half its own weight, capable of running for days at full load without braking, capable of being repaired by a soldier with a wrench, a hammer, and a rough understanding of mechanical things. When American engineers wrote, in that March 1945 Intelligence Handbook, that the Volkswagen was inferior in every way except in the comfort of its seating, they were not sneering. They were comparing two philosophies. The German philosophy said, build a beautiful, clever, finely engineered light vehicle. The American philosophy said, build a tool that any soldier can use to do any job in any place, without waiting for permission. That is what David Stirling had figured out in the desert, and that is what every American unit was about to discover everywhere else. In factories across the American Midwest, Jeeps were rolling off the lines every 80 seconds at peak production. 647,000 of them by the end of the war, roughly 362,000 from Willys, roughly 280,000 from Ford. A number so large it exceeded the total production of every light armoured vehicle the German Reich built during the entire war. They shipped by the thousand. They arrived by the thousand. They spread across every theatre of the war like water finding cracks in stone. And in the field, something happened that no engineer in Toledo or Dearborn had ever planned. American soldiers began to redesign the Jeep, without permission, without blueprints, without supervision. A sergeant with a welding torch bolted steel brackets onto the back of his Jeep. Now it could carry 2 stretcher cases lying flat across the rear, with a third stretcher strapped across the hood if the casualty count was that high. A corporal with a piece of scrap pipe mounted 2 vertical rods to the front bumper. Now the Jeep could slice through German telephone wire strung across the roads of Normandy at neck height, wire that could otherwise decapitate a driver going 40 miles an hour, a private laid steel rails across the floor. Now the Jeep could travel on the railway tracks of captured French trains. Someone else mounted a pintle on the rear. Now the Jeep carried a Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Someone else added a heavy winch to the front. Now the Jeep could pull other stuck vehicles out of the mud. On the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima in February and March of 1945, Jeeps sank to their axles where the heavier trucks could not even start their engines. And the Jeeps kept moving. And they carried wounded Marines back off the beach in numbers that the medical evacuation plans had never anticipated. On the Lido Road, cut through jungle, in the China-Burma-India theatre, Jeeps carried medical supplies and ammunition up mountain trails the British had concluded were impassable in monsoon conditions. None of these modifications were designed in a factory. They were designed by farm boys who had grown up taking apart Model A Fords behind their parents' barns. Sergeants who had been mechanics before the war. Corporals who could read a wiring diagram in their sleep. Privates who had been pumping gas at rural filling stations 2 years earlier. They looked at the Jeep, and they saw what it could become, and they built it. An American war correspondent named Ernie Pyle rode in Jeeps from North Africa to Sicily, to Italy to France. He wrote about the war for a chain of newspapers that ran his columns to almost every American town of any size. He wrote in a plain, direct voice. He wrote about ordinary soldiers doing ordinary things in extraordinary places. On the 4th of June 1943, he filed a dispatch from North Africa, later collected in his book, Here is Your War. The line he wrote about the Jeep is the one every veteran of that war remembered. And the Jeep. Good Lord, I don't think we could continue the war without the Jeep. It does everything. It goes everywhere. It's as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, as agile as a goat. It constantly carries twice what it was designed for, and still keeps on going. Ernie Pyle was killed by Japanese machine gun fire on a small island called Ishima on the 18th of April 1945. He was buried on the island where he fell. By then, the Jeep was everywhere. Some Jeeps did not roll onto the battlefield. They flew. To fit a Jeep through the side door of a British airspeed Horsa glider, or under the nose of a British General Aircraft Hamilcar, ground crews stripped the vehicle down. They removed the windshield. They removed the bumper ends. They removed the tools. They removed anything that was not strictly required. Then they lashed the lightened Jeep into the deck of the glider with steel cables. And a pilot with no engine and no second chance flew that glider silently across the English Channel, cut the tow line, and dropped it into a field behind enemy lines. In September of 1944, in Operation Market Garden, a British glider regiment landed jeeps this way at Arnhem. Those jeeps immediately hooked up to 6-pounder anti-tank guns and towed them into the streets, where the British 1st Airborne Division made its desperate last stand at the bridge. On the 24th of March 1945, in the airborne assault across the Rhine River, more than 200 American jeeps came into combat aboard Waco CG-4 gliders, delivered by the 194th Glider Infantry Regiment alone. The jeeps were not parachute-dropped. The technology to drop a vehicle of that weight under canopy did not yet exist in 1945. The men jumped by parachute. The jeeps came in by glider, and in the space between those two facts is a small line that is worth stopping on. Consider the medical role. Because that is the role the men who lived through the war almost always remembered first. The battalion aid stations were behind the line, behind the trees, behind the ridge, where the surgeons could still do their work, where the plasma bottles were hanging from wooden frames, where the sulfur drugs were laid out on canvas sheets, where, from 1943 onward, penicillin was starting to save men who would have died in 1918. The trucks of the medical units could not get to the forward foxholes. The roads were too rough. The shell fire was too heavy. The Germans were too close. But the jeeps could get there. The jeeps drove through mortar fire with red crosses painted on canvas tarps flapping in the wind. They braked hard next to men who had been hit 2 minutes before. They loaded those men across steel brackets welded to the back and, in the worst cases, across the hood. And they turned around, and they ran. They bounced across torn ground, over shell holes, through smoke, sometimes with a driver who had been in the army for 6 months and had never touched a wounded man before. They delivered the wounded to the aid stations while the wounded were still bleeding. The American died of wounds rate. That is the medical term for a soldier who is hit in combat and dies later of his injuries. In the First World War, the American died of wounds rate was about 8%. In the Second World War, it fell to about 4%. That improvement was the product of many things. Sulfur drugs, plasma, penicillin, forward surgical hospitals, air evacuation, but forward casualty evacuation, by jeep, was one of the foundational parts of the chain that saved those lives. If you served, or if your father served, or if your uncle came home when so many other men did not, it is possible that a small, ugly American truck, driven by a scared kid in a helmet, had something to do with the fact that he came home at all. Now the generals and the presidents and the kings. George S. Patton punched across France in the summer of 1944 riding in jeeps, rougher than his staff cars, faster to the front, closer to the fighting. Dwight Eisenhower was photographed in a jeep in Normandy by the Signal Corps. The picture went around the world. Bernard Montgomery, the British Field Marshal, used a jeep alongside his Humber staff car in the field. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., the eldest son of the former president, rode through the Normandy, fighting in a battered jeep he had personally named Rough Rider, in honor of his father's volunteer cavalry regiment in the Spanish-American War, until he died of a heart attack near the village of Meotis on the 12th of July, 1944. King George VI, who had come ashore on a DUKW amphibious truck to visit the Normandy beachhead 10 days after D-Day, was photographed beside American jeeps throughout his tour of the front. 50,000 jeeps were shipped to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. Russian troops called them the Willies. They used them as command vehicles for officers all the way to Berlin. And here is the part that would have made the German propaganda ministry choke on its own words if it had known. The German soldiers who captured American jeeps in Egypt, in Sicily, in Italy, in France, they did not destroy them. They did not abandon them. They repainted them with German crosses. They stenciled Wehrmacht identification onto their fenders. They pressed them into German service so often that German vehicle inventories had to be amended to account for them. A vehicle that German propaganda had publicly mocked as a toy car for an unserious nation was the same vehicle that German junior officers, in the field, were stealing whenever they could. And in a headquarters deep in the East Prussian forest, an SS officer with a scar down his cheek was, at that very moment, being called into a meeting. The subject of the meeting was jeeps, American jeeps. He wanted 100 of them, the 22nd of October, 1944. Deep in the forests of East Prussia, concrete bunkers, barbed wire, armed guards at every path. This is the Wolfschanze. The Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler's eastern headquarters, the place where the German war is now being run from underground. An SS officer walks the gravel path toward the main bunker. He is tall, 6'4". There is a long scar down the left side of his face, a dueling scar from his university days in Vienna. He is 36 years old. His name is Otto Skorzeny, SS Obersturmbannführer der Reserve. He has just been promoted. The German public knows Skorzeny as the man who saved Mussolini. 1 year earlier, in September of 1943, a glider raid landed on top of the Gran Sasso mountain in Italy and plucked the deposed Italian dictator off a hotel patio. The propaganda ministry gave Otto Skorzeny the credit, but the operation had actually been planned and led by a Luftwaffe paratrooper officer named Harold Moors. Skorzeny walks into Hitler's presence and salutes. Hitler has a new job for him. Germany is planning her last offensive of the war, a massive armoured strike through the Ardennes forest in December, aimed at splitting the American and British armies, aimed at reaching the port of Antwerp, aimed at turning the entire Western War on its head. Hitler wants Otto Skorzeny to assemble a special brigade, English-speaking German soldiers, dressed in American uniforms, driving American vehicles, sent through American lines in the opening hours of the attack. They will seize bridges over the Meuse River. They will cut telephone lines. They will redirect traffic. They will create paralytic confusion in the American rear. The cover name for the operation is Unternehmen Greif, Operation Griffin. Skorzeny listens, nods, salutes, returns to his headquarters. He submits his shopping list to the German High Command. He wants 20 American Sherman tanks. He wants 20 American armored cars. He wants 20 American self-propelled guns. He wants 40 American motorcycles. He wants 120 American trucks. And he wants 100 American jeeps, not Kübelwagens, not the elegant Porsche-designed staff cars that his own army is producing by the tens of thousands in the Volkswagen plant at Wolfsburg. American jeeps. Read that again. The senior commander of the German war effort, the man Adolf Hitler personally selected for the most audacious deception mission of the war, the officer who could have requisitioned any vehicle in the entire Wehrmacht inventory, reached into his own army's motor pool and asked for 100 vehicles of the very machine that Nazi propaganda had mocked as an American toy, because he understood what David Stirling had understood in the Egyptian desert 2 years earlier, what every American infantry sergeant on every front had already learned. The jeep would go where his own vehicles could not, and any American military policeman at any checkpoint in Europe would wave through a jeep without thinking. In a way, he would never wave through anything else. The High Command promised Skorzeny his shopping list. The High Command delivered a fraction of it. He received 2 Sherman tanks. Only one of them was running. He received 4 scout cars. He received about 30 jeeps. He received about 15 trucks. The rest, he was told, would have to be improvised. His men would have to paint German vehicles olive drab and stencil white stars onto them. It would have to be enough. But there was another problem, a worse one. Skorzeny needed fluent English speakers for his commando element, the Einheit Stielau, about 150 men who would infiltrate American lines directly. He hoped for several hundred fluent speakers. He screened roughly 2,500 volunteers. He found about 10 men who spoke perfect American English, idioms, slang, cadence, the rhythm of a soldier from Ohio or Alabama who had grown up eating breakfast at a kitchen table with his mother. Another 30 or 40 spoke good English, but without the slang, without the ease. The rest were marginal at best. Skorzeny wrote in his post-war memoir with unusual honesty that the result was terrifying, but he took the men he had, and he took the jeeps he had. And on the 16th of December, 1944, in a snowstorm that grounded Allied aircraft across northern France, the German offensive began. The Battle of the Bulge. Otto Skorzeny's commandos slipped through American lines in stolen jeeps in the first hours. They wore American uniforms. They spoke whatever English they had. They cut telephone wire. They turned road signs the wrong way. They passed forged orders to American drivers at intersections. But the deception did not last. American military police started stopping every jeep they did not personally recognize. And they started asking questions that no German infiltrator, no matter how carefully coached, could answer correctly. What is the capital of Illinois? Who plays center field for the New York Yankees? Who is Betty Grable married to? What is Mickey Mouse's dog's name? The result was a strange low-grade panic that swept the American rear areas over Christmas of 1944. General Omar Bradley, one of the highest-ranking American commanders in Europe, was briefly detained at a checkpoint, because when the military policeman asked him for the capital of Illinois, Bradley answered correctly. He said Springfield, and the military policeman thought it was Chicago. Bradley had to prove he was Bradley. General Eisenhower, when his intelligence officers informed him that Skorzeny's commandos might be trying to assassinate him personally, was effectively confined to his own headquarters at the Trianon Palace at Versailles for several days over Christmas, under heavy guard, unable to move. A handful of German commandos in stolen American jeeps came closer to paralyzing the entire Allied chain of command in the West than several German infantry divisions did in the same offensive. Roughly 18 of Skorzeny's commandos were captured in American uniforms. Under the laws of war as understood in 1944, wearing the uniform of an enemy in combat was punishable by death. The first three were named Manfred Pernus, Gunther Billing, and Wilhelm Schmidt. They were tried at Henri-Chapelle in Belgium on the 21st of December, 1944. They were executed by an American firing squad on the 23rd. Most of the remaining executions took place at Henri-Chapelle over the following days. Before the end of the month, most of Otto Skorzeny's captured commandos were dead. Skorzeny himself survived the war. He surrendered to American forces in May of 1945. He was held for 2 years. He was tried before an American military tribunal at Dachau between the 18th of August and the 9th of September 1947. On charges of improper use of American uniforms in combat, he was acquitted, he and 9 other officers of his brigade. The acquittal came in part on the testimony of a former British Special Operations executive agent, who confirmed, on the witness stand, that Allied special forces had themselves contemplated wearing enemy uniforms during the war. Skorzeny lived another 28 years. He died in Madrid in 1975. The captured American Jeep, his commando's principal infiltration vehicle, was the operational center of the most ambitious mission of his career. Now step back. The war ends, Berlin falls, the camps are opened, the dead are counted. The world tries to make sense of what has just happened. And beginning in 1945, the United States Army starts a project that no other army in history has ever attempted at this scale. They have captured most of the senior officers of the German army, field marshals, generals, divisional commanders, staff officers, men who ran entire campaigns, men who lost entire armies, and the Americans want to know what those men were thinking. In real time, during the war they had just fought. Most of the work is done at 2 facilities in the German state of Hesse, at Allendorf and at Neustadt an der Lahn, under the supervision of American officers, including a Colonel Harold Potter, and under the editorial direction of a German general named Franz Halder, the former chief of the German General Staff, the man who had once helped plan the invasions of Poland and France and the Soviet Union. The program is called the Foreign Military Studies Series. It eventually produces about 2,500 manuscripts. Many of them are now housed at the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. They constitute the largest single body of senior German military analysis of the Second World War that exists anywhere in the world. In those manuscripts, in those oral discussions, in those hundreds of interrogations, German generals are asked what beat them. They blame Hitler. They blame the weather. They blame the strategic bombing. They blame the Russians. They rarely name the Jeep directly. They do not have to. They name the consequences of it. The speed at which American units could shift weight from one sector to another before the German command could react. The depth to which American reconnaissance elements penetrated behind German lines before being detected. The rate at which American casualties were evacuated, treated, and in many cases returned to combat. The constant pressure American forward units could maintain on a battered German line, because supply never stopped reaching them, because the ammunition kept coming, because the fuel kept coming, because the wounded were pulled out and the replacements were pushed in on the same axis, in the same hour, by the same little 4-wheel drive trucks. Every one of those consequences on the ground came down to the same small, ugly vehicle. A German battalion trying to do all of those things at once had to do them sequentially, in many cases on foot, in many cases with a horse pulling the wagon, in many cases with a man leading the horse. An American battalion did them simultaneously, because each of those tasks was being performed by a separate jeep, on a separate axis. At the same time, the Germans did not have that vehicle. They did not have that culture. They did not have that man with the wrench. In 1948, 3 years after the German surrender, Dwight Eisenhower published his memoir of the war in Europe. He called it Crusade in Europe. Buried in the middle of that book is a sentence that has been quoted by every serious historian of American mechanization ever since. 4 other pieces of equipment that most senior officers came to regard as among the most vital to our success in Africa and Europe were the bulldozer, the jeep, the 2.5-ton truck, and the C-47 airplane. Curiously enough, none of these was designed for combat. Read it again. The 4 most consequential pieces of American equipment in the Second World War, in the judgment of the man who commanded the entire Allied effort in Europe, who had watched every battle, who had signed every order, who had walked past every casualty. None of them fired a bullet, none of them dropped a bomb, none of them was designed for combat. They were designed to move things. 647,000 jeeps rolled off American assembly lines during the war, roughly 362,000 from Willys, roughly 280,000 from Ford, 2,675 from Bantam, the company that had drawn the thing in the first place, and then been pushed aside by the same army that had accepted its blueprints. At peak production, the Willys plant in Toledo rolled a finished Jeep off the line every 80 seconds. The unit price of the first Willys contract in 1941, $738. 50,000 Jeeps were shipped to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease, where Russian soldiers drove them all the way to Berlin, and called them, in Russian voices, by an American name, the Willys. Tens of thousands more went to the British, to the Free French, to the Chinese Nationalist Army, to the Australians, to the New Zealanders, to almost every Allied army in the entire war. The German army built about 50,000 Kübelwagens across the same period. 50,000, 647,000. Now the men who made it possible. The American Bantam Car Company, the little company in Butler, Pennsylvania, that had drawn the original Jeep, never returned to making automobiles. It survived the war by building roughly 74,000 quarter-ton trailers that were pulled across every theatre of the war by the very Jeeps that had been taken from it. It declared bankruptcy in 1950. It was absorbed by Armco Steel 6 years later. Its name disappeared into a footnote. David Stirling, the young Scots Guards officer who first bolted a Vickers gun to a Jeep in the summer of 1942, spent the rest of the war behind German barbed wire. He was liberated from Colditz Castle in April 1945. He was 29 years old. Ernie Pyle, the war correspondent who loved the Jeep more than any other piece of American equipment, was killed by Japanese machine gun fire on the small Pacific island of Iishima on the 18th of April, 1945. Karl Knight Probst, the freelance engineer who drew the original Jeep in 5 days in a nearly empty drafting room in Butler, Pennsylvania, in July 1940, never became rich from the design, never became famous. He lived out the rest of his life in Dayton, Ohio. He worked, he raised his family, he read the newspaper in August of 1963, after a long battle with cancer. Karl Probst died in his home. He was 79 years old. Almost nobody in America knew who he was, the strange little vehicle he had drawn. The vehicle that 133 American companies had said could not be built. The vehicle that his own country had taken from him and given to Willys and Ford. The vehicle that had crossed every ocean. The vehicle that had climbed every mountain. The vehicle that had carried the wounded off Iwo Jima and out of the hedgerows of Normandy and down the Lado Road in the Burma monsoon. The vehicle that Dwight Eisenhower had listed as one of the 4 most vital pieces of equipment in the Allied victory. The vehicle that Otto Skorzeny had personally requested, 100 at a time, from Adolf Hitler in the Wolf's Lair. That vehicle outlived Karl Probst. That vehicle outlived almost all of them. Most of the 647,000 original Jeeps have been scrapped now. The surviving ones sit in barns and garages across America. They are polished on Saturday afternoons by grandsons and great-grandsons of the men who drove them. They are shown at county fairs and 4th of July parades. They are bought at auction for tens of thousands of dollars by collectors whose fathers or grandfathers might have driven one of them out of a transport ship at Salerno, or at Cherbourg, or at Manila Bay, The Wehrmacht never said out loud what it had learned in the war, but its behavior said everything. It captured American jeeps and repainted them with German crosses. It sent Otto Skorzeny's commandos through American lines in stolen American jeeps in the last great German offensive of the war. It built its most ambitious deception mission of the war around the requirement that its men be given, in whatever numbers salvage units could find them, American jeeps. And the man who commanded the Allied armies in Europe, when he sat down years later to write his account of the war, listed the jeep as one of 4 pieces of equipment most vital to the victory. None of them, he wrote, was designed for combat. That sentence, more than any quote attributed to any German general in any book, is the verdict that holds. If you served, and you drove one, or if your father did, or your uncle did, or the man next door did, the men who built the jeep and drove the jeep and bled in the jeep are mostly gone now. The vehicle they built is the closest thing they have to a monument, and the monument is still on the road.